Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're out on Lake Chickamauga, just enjoying some time on my home lake, which I have not been able to spend a lot of time out here. But one thing I do know, even though I don't know, how the fishing really is right now, I do know from experience that this time of year, which it's November 8th right now, this time of year, we still have a ton of shad back in these creeks, that are kind of holdouts or holdovers from that big shad migration that started in September and generally will last all the way through December. There'll still be some shad, some big groups of shad that congregate in certain areas in these creeks. And one thing I definitely know, because I've fished this pattern for the last 7 years and it's pretty much the same every single year, is I know when I'm getting around these large groups of threadfin shad and trying to target the bass within them, I have to match the hatch perfectly. So today I'm using this Z-Man minnows. This is a very small little swim bait made of Elastec. I'm using a 1/4 ounce jig head, the Headlocks HD. I'll just run through the tackle real quick. I'm using 12-pound test gold label fluorocarbon from Seagar attached to a main line on my spinning gear of 15-pound test smackdown braid. And then I'm using a 610 medium heavy Versa Series rod and a S4000 Fitzgerald spinning reel. So that's my setup. And the reason why I'm using this bait is because it's exactly the same size, profile, and color. Color's a little bit different, but very, very close to the bait fish that are in this area right now. And this is a principle that we call matching the hatch, which I think was originated by trout fishermen, because one thing that trout fishermen know is that trout as a species, they tend to be way more specific as far as what they eat. And so they're very, very keyed into, the size, shape, and color of the type of things that they're eating, especially in rivers and creeks and high current situations. Trout just don't have the ability to expend a lot of energy for something that they don't know is going to give them the energy back, and so what they end up doing is, you see a lot of fly fishermen, they will pick a fly because they see a certain hatch happening. So insects are emerging from the water and they're hatching, and that is what the trout are focusing on at that moment, because that is what is the most prevalent food source. So trout are really, really specific. So matching the hatch with them is super important pretty much the entire time you're fishing for them. Bass are a little bit different. There are times where they get very, very specific as to what they're eating. And then there's also a lot of times where they will be more opportunistic, that they'll just pretty much eat anything that moves. They'll eat things that aren't even moving sometimes. So bass are a little bit different, but there are times like this situation right here. Like I said, there are hundreds of thousands of these shad back here, millions of these shad that these bass can feed on right now. And so when that happens, when the food source is prevalent and they're all a uniform size, those fish tend to really focus in on that specific size, shape, and color of those bait fish. And so in a situation like this, where you've got a ton of different, prey species in a small area, I find that it's really, really important to match the hatch. I mean, as specifically as you possibly can, especially when it comes to size. Color, you can fudge just a little bit. And the reason why I say that is because sometimes when you have a lot of different food source around you or around the fish, sometimes it pays off to be just a little bit different than the other, bait fish. So the fish have no shortage of options as far as what shad to eat in here. But the shad that really get picked off are the ones that are a little bit different. Maybe they're, a little bit more lethargic. They're a little bit slower than the rest of the group. Maybe they have a different pigmentation that allows those specific bait fish to be picked out of the school by the bass. And so I've found that as long as I have the size and shape correct, as close as possible, sometimes it pays off to maybe be a little bit lighter, like this pearl blue glimmer. This is a really good example because, you know, if you look at a shad, it's a little bit more shiny. It's really not as opaque as this. It doesn't show up as white under the water overall, but this color seems to work really, really good in these situations because I think that the fish can pick out this bait as opposed to all the other more realistic shad in the school. So I think that on color you can kind of, you know, adjust things a little bit, but I think when the fish are really, really keyed in on a certain type of bait fish, you need to really do your best to match the size and shape especially. And then, you know, you definitely don't want to be fishing like black and blue or green pumpkin when you should be throwing a shad pattern. I'm not saying like go overboard on that, but if you know they're you know seeing a ton of different shad, just doing a shade off of what the natural color is can pay dividends in a lot of situations. But sometimes you want to match all three of those variables, size, shape, and color, as closely as possible. All right, so now that I've rambled on about, you know, the importance of you know, matching the hatch, which generally for bass fishing, if I would say that the more prevalent the prey species is, the more specific the bass get. Let's talk about situations where maybe matching the hatch isn't as big of a deal. And in my experience, those situations are generally when you don't see a single species of prey that is super prevalent. So if there's not just a giant you know, group of shad in an area, maybe the fish are just feeding on some bluegill here, maybe some crawfish, maybe you know, some shiners or something like that. They're more opportunistic because the food sources are a little bit more sparse and there's more variety. That's a situation where you can throw a lot of different things and you don't have to match the hatch specifically to any one species or example. You can actually be a little bit more loose with your presentations because the bass are not really keyed in on one specific type of food. They're opportunistic. They're going to eat whatever, you know, seems like a good option at the time. So those types of situations where maybe you're just not seeing specific bait fish, you're seeing a lot of different types of bait fish and food sources, you can kind of myth it a little bit and be less specific with your choices. Another situation is, you know, that I've seen, and it's kind of, you know, anecdotal, just from my own experiences, but for instance, like up at Lake Champlain several years ago, I was fishing a tour event up there, and I had this one area that was a good largemouth area, throwing a chatterbait. I was throwing a perch colored chatterbait and just crushing them on it, catching a ton of fish. But then the bite just would shut down after I caught like 30 or 40 fish, and I thought that maybe I just fished, you know, outfished the area, you know, caught too many bass. Well, I think it was the second day of the tournament. After that bite died off on that perch colored chatterbait, I was just like, you know, well, let me try something different. Let me try a different color. And instead of going to like, and this was like tannic stain water, and instead of going to like my usual tannic stain colors, I was like, all right, let's just try white, you know, which doesn't match any of the bait fish that, you know, the prey species they be eating in the area, but we're going to try it anyways. So I ended up just going ahead and, you know, making the switch to just bold white, silver blade, and ended up crushing them again for another hour and a half, 2 hours. It was insane how they were so opportunistic there because they were so used to eating so many different types of you know, prey species that just making the switch from, you know, something that to me looked more realistic to something that just stood out more, you know, how big of a difference that made. And I was able to capitalize on some more big bites by doing that and making that change. So there are times where you go the exact opposite direction of matching the hatch, and you can have great success doing that. And sometimes I feel like that, you know, if I do get in a situation where say there's millions of shad or just a ton of this certain type of food source in an area, sometimes if I'm not having any success matching the hatch as closely as possible, I'll start venturing off course and really start trying some different things to differentiate myself in that situation. Maybe, you know, if the fish are feeding on shad, maybe try a crawfish pattern, or something like that. I'm not saying, again, I'm kind of contradicting myself a little bit here, but sometimes, you know, the rules of fishing are not cut and dry. The majority of the time they're not. Sometimes you really have to experiment and try different things. So anyways, guys, those are just some thoughts on matching the hatch. It is a very, very important principle, but sometimes it's also important to kind of, you know, go do the opposite of what match the hatch says. Because bass, in the end, are very opportunistic. They're very different than other species like trout that do get hyper focused on a specific size, shape, and color of a you know, insect or whatever they're feeding on. So anyways, guys, hopefully this discussion kind of helps you understand, you know, the importance of matching the hatch or not matching the hatch on the other side. And yeah, hopefully it helps you catch more fish. If you guys have any questions at all, please drop a comment below. I do want to mention that this beautiful boat that I'm sitting in right now, my Phoenix 921 Elite, it's a 2023 model, is for sale right now. If you guys are interested in it, please send me an email at sonar@sonarfishing.com. And also keep in mind, if you want to come to Lake Chickamauga or, you know, any of the lakes near me like Watts Bar, and you want to go on a guide trip, I am booking guide trips right now. And you can also send me an email to the same email, sonar@sonarfishing.com, to book a trip with me. So thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, trust the process, and I'm going to see you out on the water.